Dr. Diana Contreras, lecturer at Cardiff University, UK. Welcome, Dr. Diana. Professor Rasha Abdulaziz, the professor and the head of the Business Information Systems Department, Arab Academy for Science, Technology and Maritime Transport, Egypt. Welcome, Professor. And finally, Professor Richard Butt, the Deputy Principal and Deputy Vice Chancellor from Queen Margaret University, Edinburgh. Welcome, Professor.
Good morning, everyone. Sabahir. I'm Susana. I'm going to be chairing this panel, and the focus, as Rowan has just said, is what role can TNE play in widening access to international education for diverse groups. So I'll just start with a quick framing, and then we'll turn to our excellent panel, who we're very much looking forward to speaking to. So, I think you'll all have heard that we often discuss that TNE has the potential to widen access. And this is a view that is shared by many who are involved in TNE. So the British Council in 2022 published a report called The Value of TNE Partnerships, and 68% of those who were surveyed who were working in higher education, transnational education, agreed that TNE widens access for underrepresented socioeconomic groups. 63% agreed that it contributes to improved gender balance, and 37% that it widens access for underrepresented ethnicities. And I was very struck when we went to Coventry University yesterday that Professor Mohammed Shouti welcomed us with the words, "Welcome abroad." And when we were hearing from Professor Mustafa Rafat on the first day of the conference, he told us that TNE is not a business model, but the democratization of elite education and a pathway to inclusive internationalization. And I think that that's very important that we keep in mind that it is about widening access to international education. Griff reminded us on the first day that only 2 or 3% of the total population of higher education students are going to be internationally mobile. So of course, transnational education is giving opportunity for people to access an international qualification much closer to home, which means that it's more affordable, which means that we're reducing barriers that may be there for international travel, whether that's visas, family commitments, or the need to work while you're studying. And of course, TNE can also widen access to particular subjects. So it can be that TNE provides a way to have a course or a program, a specialism which isn't already offered in the country. But I think what we're going to discuss on this panel is that that isn't automatic. It's not necessarily just going to happen by chance that transnational education will widen access and create a more inclusive education. And we do need to be deliberate and intentional if we want transnational education to realise its potential to open access to more diverse groups. So in this panel, we're going to be discussing strategies for doing that with a very eminent panel of experts who have different experiences of working with different types of groups within the transnational and international education sphere, and finding out more about how we do this in practice. So I'm going to turn to my panel, and I'm going to start with Professor Rasha from the Arab Academy, and we'll ask some specific questions for our panelists first to bring out their particular expertise, and then we will have some more general panel, and I'm very keen to make time for you to also share your experiences or ask questions at the end. So Professor Rasha, thank you for being with us. At the Arab Academy, how have you leveraged your TNE collaborations, maybe particularly with Coventry University, to address questions of female leadership in higher education in Egypt?
Am I loud? Actually, I'll start, yes, with a collaboration with Coventry, and it started in a very practical way. Through the transnational education, where we used to deliver dual degree programs with ASTMT together with Coventry in business administration, majoring in accounting, finance, and marketing. And this has been like a decade ago, and it's still sustainable. And in parallel, we were running another transnational education, actually a dual degree program for both levels, the undergraduate and the postgraduate, with Cardiff Metropolitan University. And being PhD supervisor to a number of students, this introduced me to UK friends who later on they reached out for me, making the initiative of the first internationally funded project actually by the British Council, thanks to you. And it was actually a series of international projects with Coventry University. Alongside these partnerships, I've been leading and managing an undergraduate dual degree program with Northampton University, which is another UK university. And this has been there for 7 years with all the program development and restructuring and revalidations, and it's been again sustained. And we started with this Tamkeen initiative, which is an acronym in Arabic meaning empowerment, which did seek to empower female academics in senior leadership positions, particularly in higher education. And when we started this investigation, it was found that you cannot empower women in isolation. So we thought of creating the awareness and actually helping out and possibly leading the way through the transferring the UK experience of the advanced higher education fellowships. And 3 candidates were eligible and they got the senior fellowship, and this was an outcome from the first initiative. We understood we need networking. We understood that we need senior female academics to see each other, because we need mentors, we need collaborations, we need to understand the view, not work in isolation. So it was really laborious, where we scanned all senior academic leaders in higher education across Egypt in all universities. You can imagine, although we're all over the place, we are still underrepresented in senior higher education leadership position. And we were amazed by how people were really excited and interested, especially those as the very few presidents in Egypt and the deans and vice presidents. And working on this, we realized we're only paving the way to put things in action. So networking and visible networks and strong leaderships being connected and linked. Of course, using formal and informal and digital platforms. And we took it one further step to, after the networking, it's a project called Tashbik, and in Arabic it's networking. And then this led to Tashriya, which opened the door for legislation. We put this into action. We've been understanding the real problems and the investigation, but now, how do we do this? So if I would take it back to the transnational education, actually Coventry was one of the very successful universities that we collaborated with in terms of the undergraduate transnational education, dual degree programs, and 3 consecutive internationally funded projects. But also, not only Northampton, we've worked with Brunel University and Northumbria University on digital inclusion. And we started with giving a closer look on single mothers, but then it emerged with the extensive investigation with all stakeholders involved and everyone brought on the table, including the Senate and the Parliament and Women Council and people from higher education. We found out that it's a women problem, not single mothers only. So this Brunel and Northumbria University were only initiatives that were led by a follow-up projects with Brunel University, which is called Digital, for digital inclusion for women in STEM, addressing the underrepresentation of women in STEM, and the transnational education postgraduate program with Northumbria, where we had numerous enrollment requests when it was not there. It was only the program constructed, but the eagerness of people really interested in enrolling in transnational education postgraduate program, especially the hybrid program, and seeing what the do's or don'ts and what should be addressed, leveraged the postgraduate program, and we already have a pool waiting for it to be actually launched. So I would say that this paved the way for further and deeper collaborations. And the minute you start something, you start realizing it doesn't tie up loose ends. You have to go on and move on with doing this or putting this into action. So it's the long-term collaborations and partnerships and the strategic thinking. And even if it was a small initiative, you have to think what's next, so that we do actually achieve the inclusivity within the transnational education. So this would be it.
Thank you so much, Professor Rasha. I think that's such an important point, that this is not something that you can dabble in. If you start on a journey of widening access and making things more inclusive, you must follow through, because the demand is there. People do want that access, and so you must continue. That's wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn next to Ben, and we're going to explore a slightly different group. So Ben, can you tell us how Mosaik education is harnessing the potential of transnational education and the expanding UK TNE provision in particular around the world to open access to higher education for refugee groups?
Sure, thank you, and good morning everyone. Before I get into how Mosaik's doing it, I just wanted to introduce Mosaik briefly, because I'm assuming that not everyone in this room knows who Mosaik is. We're a UK NGO, but we have a very, very niche and specific focus relevant to this room, which is increasing access to university for refugees and young people affected by conflict and crisis. The reason we do that is that less than 1 in 10 refugees are able to access to any tertiary education whatsoever. And in the last 10 years, the number of people displaced globally has doubled from 60 million to 120 million. Over 120 million actually last year. So we think this is a significant challenge to be addressed, and the reason we're really excited about TNE is that we think it offers a really interesting and new opportunity to try and address that challenge, and we think UK universities in particular, because of the scale and the activity, can be really important in that. There's a few specific opportunities I think with TNE that it offers us. One is its proximity to crisis. The second is as I said, the level of activity and interest, and then finally it can contribute to development outcomes in the hosting country. And Egypt, I think, is a really nice illustration of that. So just over the border we have Sudan. Egypt hosts over 1 million refugees and displaced people, and actually if you speak, those are the UNHCR statistics, if you speak to people in Egypt they think it's a lot higher, because you have Sudan over the border, Syrian refugees, people from Palestine, Ethiopia, and so on. Secondly, in our work with different countries and universities around the world, we found that actually including those marginalised communities in tertiary education, supporting to do that can contribute to development outcomes. We've been doing some work in India, and we've seen that actually India has national policy level objectives around inclusion in tertiary education and aligned with the SDGs. So actually opening up that access can contribute to local objectives as well. So Egypt, I think, is a really nice illustration, but if we kind of zoom back out and in our conversations with Pro-Vice Chancellors and VCs in the UK, they say, well, this is great. You know, it aligns with all our strategies, our civic missions, our impact. It can help us maybe even convince those people who are a little bit more sceptical about TNE back home in the UK about how and where we should be doing this. But they come to us with common questions. The first one is, well, what can we do? Where can we work? Who can we work with? And how can we do this? So last year, Mosaik started an initiative called the Global Response Platform, and that aims to support UK universities and enable them to reach and support students and young people affected by students in crisis, leveraging things like TNE, whether that is through branch campuses or online. The Global Response Platform will focus on 3 areas: connecting universities to people and organisations that can support, that can help them reach young refugees. So for example, last year we held a briefing on how UK universities can support young women in Afghanistan who currently aren't allowed to go to higher education. And we were able to connect Abertay University to Afghan civil society in designing and trying to set up online degrees and ensuring that the young women there have access to the right equipment and data and so on. Second thing we're doing is creating shared infrastructure. So last year we ran 4 briefings on different locations: Egypt, Eastern Chad, India and Afghanistan, where we're able to create a shared understanding of what the challenges are and what the opportunities are. We're also, on the back of that, doing a piece of work with Leeds University, who are a member of the Global Response Platform, to create a stackable program that might allow universities to basically plug in online content. And then you're lowering the threshold for a university to be able to reach a crisis-affected community. And the last thing we're doing is convening and coordinating, so bringing universities together to align actions and see where there's opportunities. So for here in Egypt, for example, we've been speaking to a group of universities about how some could do foundation programs, some could do undergraduate programs, and how others could do postgraduate. And I think the real kind of secret and essence, or what we're aiming to achieve with this, is 2 really important points that universities are interested in. One is lowering the threshold and potential investment that they might need to make in including communities affected by crisis and conflict. And secondly, potentially by catalysing the activity, we think, or catalysing activities and offers and support for different communities, we think there's potentially the opportunity to raise additional funds around these activities as well. And the reason why we're focusing so closely on those 2 elements is that we know that higher education, UK higher education and UK universities are really up against it financially, but it's still, this is still a really, they see it as a core part of their mission. An example of that is we were lucky to work with the University of London and EUE in developing a project proposal for the British Council exploratory grants. So we've been able to work with those universities and bring funds towards the 2 universities there. But I'll stop there because I think we'll be talking more about that project.
Thank you, Ben, and I think that's brilliant to mention the money, because I think any discussion of transnational education without mentioning the finances is probably somewhat naive, so that's a good point to end on. And we're going to turn, as you say, to Dr. Bassant, who's sitting next to you next, and Dr. Bassant will tell us a bit more about the project that you're developing together. So, Dr. Bassant, how has the collaboration that you're developing at EUE with Mosaik and other partners, how will that help to open access to refugees for university in Egypt, and why is that so important?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. The project that we are having under the TNE is called Addressing Barriers to Higher Education for Refugee Students in Egypt. It is co-created by the University of London, the European University in Egypt, in collaboration with Mosaik and the UNHCR. As Ben said, that Egypt hosts around 100 million refugees, and these refugees, they have limited access to education because of some barriers from documentation, from financial challenges, and so on. And in Egypt, they face an additional layer of barriers from legal residency permits, from the non-recognition of prior qualifications, language barriers, and so on. And the EUE shares the same vision of the University of London, with the goal to widen participation and access to education. And the University the European universities in Egypt, they have the social, or as part of its social and community responsibility policy, they are trying to accommodate as much number or as many number of refugee students as its capacity allows, and with, of course, providing them with scholarships and financial aid. And we are already hosting a large number of refugees, mainly or migrants who come from regions where they face conflicts or war zones, mainly from Sudan, from Yemen, from Libya, and from Syria. And they actually constitute around 15% of the total number of students in the university, and all of these refugees are provided with financial aid and scholarships, up to 100% full scholarships. And therefore, this project that we have with Mosaik under the TNE and the University of London and UNHCR, it actually will help our university and Egypt in fulfilling this responsibility, the social responsibility, through enabling or enhancing and facilitating their access to our university and higher education. So what do we do in this project, and how are we going to achieve this goal? We are dividing the project into 4 main stages. The first stage is that we are going to do a mapping and scoping of the existing barriers in Egypt for refugees to higher education, with all of the stakeholders together. This mapping will identify the barriers, identify who are the main stakeholders in Egypt that we are going to work with, okay, and identify the opportunities for having this inclusive pathway that we are going to create. And this will set a kind of like the basis of the action plan that we are going to all sign and move forward from there. And then the second stage, we are going to have 2 policy and practice dialogues with all of the stakeholders involved, from the governments, from the local NGOs, from those who are represented, the refugees in Egypt, and from the UK stakeholders as well. And these, through the mapping exercise and the policy dialogues, we are going to create the framework for collaboration and design our pilot project later on. At the third stage, we are going to write and publish a learning and policy brief, okay, based on the dialogue and based on the mapping exercise. And we are going to share this policy brief with all of the stakeholders. In Egypt, we are going to target the main ministries in the education and also those who are working with refugees, the UNHCR, of course, and the local NGOs in Egypt who are actually can benefit from this educational model for having access in order to complement their already existing educational projects or initiatives. Okay. And we are going to also target the policy and funding bodies, the donors, the international networks who are interested in a scalable approach, that something that like what we're doing. In the final stage, we are going to have a pilot foundation and micro-credentials program. I remember on the first day, Dr. Mustafa Rafat, from the Supreme Council, was talking about the importance of micro-credentials. Okay. And that's why we are focusing on that specifically. And based on the previous stages, the mapping, the policy dialogues, and the policy briefs, we are going to create this micro-credential program. We are going to all together co-create and co-design the curriculum, and we are going to offer it online and through blended learning model. And I'm going to tell you later why this is important. For the pilot phase, we aim to target 25 students, and then we are going to scale after 12 months to 100 students, and this is going to be done annually, okay, across 4 cohorts, pending on, of course, the amount of funding that we will be able to secure at later stages after this 17-month will end. We are going to disseminate the pilot outputs, okay? We are going to disseminate information about the results, the experiences of those refugee students, the number of enrollment, and the gender disaggregated data. Why is this project important, and what are the benefits, as you asked? Well, removing the barriers for refugee students directly supports social impact and inclusion goals. And this actually will automatically contribute to attaining the SDGs most of them. Okay, this is of particular importance for Egypt because of its commitment nationally and internationally to attain the goals, and of course for the European universities in Egypt also, as it wants to contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We are targeting SDG number 4, of course, high quality education by having an inclusive curriculum, inclusive educational approaches. We are targeting SDG 5, gender equality. We are making sure that empowering women or having opportunities for women is as a cross-cutting theme across all of the 4 stages in our project. We are going to target SDG 10, of course, the reduced inequalities, goes without saying, and of course SDG 17, which is the partnership for achieving the goal. The inclusion pathway specifically contributes to Egypt's development goals, because over the next, as Ben said, over the next 3 to 5 years, Egypt is likely to see an increase of pressure on its public services, including education. And the project will actually help Egypt respond to this challenge by, for example, offering the refugee access to education will help in increasing their potential to have employment in the future, and this will, of course, reduce dependency on humanitarian aid, reduce dependency on our financial capacity, and actually this will contribute to the broader goals of Egypt in terms of involvement of youth participation, and of course economic participation. Also, we are going to, through the digital model and the blended learning model, these models are cost effective and could be scalable, meaning that Egypt can widen the access without overburdening the digital infrastructure or the infrastructure of campuses. And this is actually important for the environment as well, because it reduces the amount of traveling, okay, that you need, and it reduces the need to expand physical campuses. This is very important for Egypt now. The other thing is that, of course, the project contributes to social cohesion by actually reducing the tensions between host communities and the refugees and making them feel that they are included and offered opportunities. And also it actually aligns with the ODA priorities for providing social welfare for women. Okay, they will have greater economic opportunities and, of course, reducing poverty and improving equality. The project also provides a replicable and scalable framework, okay, for addressing barriers that could be replicated in other nations worldwide. It also offers a model for how to co-create together and design curricula in micro-credential programs. This is scalable and could be adapted according to each national needs, what kind of fields the micro-credentials will target. For example, in Egypt, we want to target STEM mainly. As Professor Rasha said, we are having a problem, especially for women, in accessing STEM education, and this goes also for students, not only in professors. It will provide an improved insight for the regulatory and policy framework regarding refugees, and this is important because it will better inform the policy design and change. It will better inform our future advocacy, what kind of proposals for funding we are going to write, and of course it will shape how we are going to have capacity building projects for staff and for universities. The TNE inclusive pathway also addresses gender equality. And here I'm going to talk specifically about gender equality because it's a major part of our project. In Egypt, women remain underrepresented in STEM, specifically, even though in general in higher education it's 50-50. The number of women is almost as a number of men in education, in higher education, but in STEM we are underrepresented. So displaced women, they face compounded barriers, okay, in addition to that. So the project actually contributes by co-designing this inclusive pathways that are gender sensitive, okay? And we are going to make sure that gender barriers are included in the mapping, are included in the dialogues are included in the pilot projects and in our policy outcomes. For example, in the mapping, we need to make sure to identify the barriers that are specifically targeting gender in terms of languages, in terms of who are genders that are caregivers or have responsibilities to their families, elderly or the children, mobility, who have to commute from long distances. We are going to make sure that there is an outreach and admission that is gender sensitive in terms of the languages. You are going to provide, for example, the material for admission in Arabic and English at the same time. Make sure that the language is simple for them. Make sure that you, in your outreach, you are reaching the organizations that work specifically of females from underrepresented areas, females that are coming from displaced communities. And of course, in the delivery and support, we are seeking to have educational programs that are adaptable to this in terms of the schedule, and try to offer hybrid platforms or online platforms for those people, or specifically women who cannot commute and come. And of course, we are going to focus on making sure that there is a large number of access for females in the micro-credentials, especially in STEM projects. So this is in sum what we are going to do in this project. Thank you.
You've also given the perfect segue to our next speaker, so that's brilliant. But just to pick up on a couple of the points that you made there, I mean, I think it's really important. I think what came across for me there anyway was the amount of planning and preparation that's needed, the real understanding of the needs of the group that you're trying to reach to help them to access the provision that you're going to make is absolutely paramount, and it's clear that you've done a huge amount of thinking there. So we're looking forward to seeing all the findings that you're going to so generously share. So next, with the Q on women in STEM, we're going to turn to you, Dr. Diana. And I'd like you to talk to us about how you've been addressing gender disparities in STEM in the work that Cardiff University does internationally or at home.
Thank you, Susana. Well, the initial question, the main question of the panel was how TNE widening access, and well, the answer is already on the question, is wide access, and it's access to a degree by a local and international institution, and that implies another value for employment, for applying for international positions. And in the project that we have with the British Council that is called Reducing Gender Disparity in STEM from high school to professional life, that later we extended to kindergarten from professional life, what we realize is that this problem should be, this topic should be addressed in 4 stages, that is attraction, recruitment, employability, and retention. While we found that in the West, the problem is attraction. That's why within the framework of the project, we purchased some material that is to attract young girls to STEM. In the MENA region, in this region, the problem is employability and retention. Here in the MENA region, the number of women recruited or enrolled in STEM programs is higher than men. But then when we go to check employment, then that number drops. And I think transnational education can contribute to change that situation. How? In the giving access to generate or to promote gender roles, professors. You know, these are materials that are exactly for retention and employability. Actually, this book was written by our colleague, Raul. And what we see is that maybe the problem is the lack of role models that inspire women. So I want to give you the example, this book that 50 women in sciences, the only women that is highlighted is Mariam Mirzakhami, an Iranian mathematician, and no one else. So, and we know that in the MENA region there are more women, more role models that can inspire women to stay in STEM, because we have a leaky pipe. We are losing talent, yes. And actually, I understand that the Minister of Education of the Emirates, it's a woman. one of the doctors that contributed to the vaccine, development the vaccine of COVID-19 is from Lebanon. We have also Professor Heba El-Kaidi in the American University of El Cairo that works with the topic of STEM, and other women that make advocacy for STEM, for reduced disparity in STEM in the region. So what we need is more role models, and transnational education can contribute to that. And actually, there is another thing. In transnational education, we work, usually it's one institution from the global north with one institution from another region, from the global south. So necessarily there should be a kind of syncretism that contributes also to decolonization of the curriculum. So the curriculum ends to be less Eurocentric and more aligned with local needs. So we are already addressing 2 points. Yes, that's why it's important that governments support, and thanks to British Council to fund these kind of projects, because if we need to encourage women to pursue different careers, to care to and contribute to STEM. We need a feminine perspective. We also need to improve quality of life, and in countries that are moving to the economy of knowledge, the topic of increasing the number of women in STEM is crucial. That's why it's important that when there is funding for these projects, we use it in promoting attraction, retention, employability, because it's not enough to do research in a STEM topic and then hire one intern, one woman as an intern, and says, we are contributing to employability in STEM. That's not the point, that's only one case. Or just to make a workshop in a topic related to STEM and count the number of women who attend the workshop and say, okay, we are attracting women to STEM. That's that's not the point. So the idea is that we are really focus the resources in that. And also the other point is, it's not enough to think that because here in this environment we see a lot of women in STEM, a lot of role models to follow, but it's not the general level. So it's not enough in a household when women and men both work in STEM, and maybe the woman earn more money than the men. That's not a case study to say, okay, there is no gender gap in STEM. No, it's one case. It's necessary to do research to determine if there is or not a gender gap in a gender gap payment in STEM in the MENA region, if yes or not, and why. So that's I think the TNE, the contribution contributes to highlight role models, women that inspire others, and maybe stop that leaking pipe of women who abandon STEM for not having enough examples of resilience or support or an example of success.
Thanks very much, Dr. Diana. And I think one point you made that really struck me was that you can't assume that the issues are the same in your university and the partner university that you might be working with. You know, you're talking about in the UK, in Cardiff, in Wales, the issue might be attracting women to STEM, whereas in Egypt you have wonderful women in STEM, but maybe the leadership pathway is not enough, not well established enough, not easy enough for people to follow. So that's a really interesting point.
Actually, it has a name. It's called MENA paradox. Yes, and sorry, I'm gonna leave this material maybe displayed over there for those who wants to see it. Yes, to have a look, because this is a great material for girls, great material also for us.
So finally, we're going to turn to Professor Richard from Queen Margaret University. And could you tell us a little bit about how you're working to make your TNE provision with partners around the world more inclusive?
Yes, thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. So a useful way of thinking about the sort of response to that question is through the inclusive higher education framework. It's not specifically about TNE, but it was developed for the QAA by 7 UK universities, and it provides a sort of systematic structure for thinking about, well, how do we ensure that students on our TNE programs have an inclusive experience. And there are 5 components, and I'll try to sort of illustrate each of those 5 through some of the work we're doing with our partners. The first is around having processes and structures that actively consider questions of equality and diversity. Like in a UK university, we have a range of equality, diversity and inclusion policies, and so the way in which we kind of build that in our TNE programs, and indeed our programs on our own campus, is through ensuring that the validation and review process has both a toolkit for program teams and for panelists, and a sort of checklist that corresponds to that actively kind of requires program teams to consider the kind of questions that are raised in our policies. But crucially, in a TNE context, it advises that questions of diversity have to be considered within the local context. So a couple of examples of that are partners in Mumbai, for instance. Caste will be a particular kind of consideration, so their statement on inclusion of access will explicitly address the question of caste and sort of state that caste will not be a consideration or a barrier to students joining the program. Another example, and we've sort of heard about this in Egypt as well from other members of the panel, but in our partners in Uzbekistan, women have been historically underrepresented in Uzbekistan higher education, both in terms of teaching and in terms of the sort of student population. So our partner there, British Management University, actively prioritises academic, financial, pastoral support for women, and particularly for women under difficult life circumstances. And that will include very practical things like access to the halls of residence that are immediately adjacent to the campus. And I suppose something we've also heard, and we heard yesterday, very common in Egypt, in the kind of private universities and international branch campuses, and it's true of our partners in Greece as well, Metropolitan College, is the provision of a free bus service, which sounds very sort of, sounds relatively kind of sort of, simple and mundane, but we've seen even in Scotland, in Scotland, there's a kind of free bus passes for people under the age of 22, I think it is, and that kind of immediately sort of addressed barriers for people in kind of rural areas, just as it will in Egypt, and it does in Greece in terms of accessing higher education. It's kind of very, very practical, but it's a kind of critical one. The second component of the framework is curriculum design and delivery, and really for TNE, that's particularly about ensuring you have a curriculum that students feel is relevant to them. I mean, that motivates them, but it's also kind of critical in terms of their employment skills on graduation. So again, if we take our partners in Uzbekistan, we worked very closely with them in developing programs that took into account the government's, so this is on kind of finance and accounting programs and business programs, the government's kind of 2030 economic reform agenda. So that meant ensuring that the curriculum covered things like local regulatory frameworks, included local case studies, considered national priorities such as entrepreneurship, financial and taxation reform, and regional economic development. Another kind of very substantive way in which we've ensured the curriculum delivery is appropriate to our partners in Greece is that unusually, unlike any of our other partnerships, the language of instruction and assessment is Greek. That wasn't initially the case. We've worked with them for 27 years. There's a kind of, to read more about it, there's a case study of this on the Quality Assurance Agency's website in terms of, well, how do you ensure kind of quality when the language of delivery is a language other than English if you're a UK provider. But that of course means that many of our programs are in the area of health, and also then in sort of the other schools in sort of hospitality and tourism. They're going to be practicing in Greek. They need to be kind of able to engage with their kind of sort of clients, patients, tourists, etc. in Greek. They take English language programs alongside their because understanding that whether that's decreasingly an issue in terms of sort of the way in which sort of digital texts are available, but there is a question about the availability of more specialist texts in a language other than English. So it's important that they do develop their English language skills at the same time. But sort of teaching them and assessing them in Greek means that they're ready to sort of work and contribute to the Greek workforce. The third area is assessment and feedback, and I mean assessment clearly key component of student learning, but also a key component of student anxiety, and that's going to be sort of, you know, doubly if not more the case for students who are from underrepresented groups, sort of students we're sort of talking about here. And that's often an area where our partners sort of, you know, sort of looking to us particularly through our Learning Enhancement and Academic Development Unit to provide workshops on areas like compassionate pedagogy, authentic assessment, you know, sort of authentic assessment, much like, you know, a kind of relevant curriculum. And we heard nice examples of these yesterday at the Knowledge Hub of ensuring the assessment is, you know, sort of has moved away from, and that can be a challenge for some of our partners in some regions, a very sort of, you know, traditional kind of exam-based approach to giving students live kind of projects, working with live companies that can benefit both the students, their employability skills, but also the companies they're working with. Fourthly, community and belonging, and some of the panelists have sort of touched on this. It's kind of critical that students, particularly these students, you know, from again those underrepresented groups, feel like they are seen, that they can see themselves in the staff. They'll often also be sort of first generation into higher education. So we work with our partners to ensure that their induction programs and right the way through the first semester actively build in sessions and in activities that encourage students to build friendships and start kind of developing those peer networks. And we hold, again, examples of this yesterday. Our Greek partners and our kind of Sri Lankan partners are sort of examples of where they'll also have kind of events throughout the calendar that bring together multidisciplinary teams. So bringing students from across different academic programs together to work on a problem, often driven by some of the, either a particular local challenge for a local community group or kind of third sector organisation, or one of the big kind of, you know, sort of global challenges. And then finally, the final component in the framework is what they refer to as pathways to success. And this is recognising that academic success isn't only about grades, it's also about kind of graduating with a broad set of what we would refer to in the UK often as graduate attributes, but really those personal attributes, strong communication skills, a kind of a confidence, a kind of sort of entrepreneurial mindset, so on and so forth. So again, we'll work with our partners to ensure that their programs offer these sorts of opportunities. And often this is where we have a huge amount to learn from our partners and the work that they do. And a nice example, kind of going back to sort of the kind of sort of refugees, our partners in Greece, we were actually referred to in our very first session sort of here a couple of days ago. They have a podiatry program, unique in Greece. Those podiatry students went and worked with refugees because feet, as you can imagine, offer and the kind of, you know, the sort of health and condition of your feet is often a particular challenge for refugees, alongside, you know, sort of a whole range of other things. But that was something that the podiatry students could make an active contribution to, in recognising kind of Greece's role in welcoming kind of refugees from particular regions. Another example, along with Edinburgh University, we have a new partnership in the new capital with Capital Universities Foundation, building on their experience in the university in Sinai, where their health students offer kind of community health to local communities. So our partners in here have partnered with the Egyptian Red Crescent, who are going to have an office in the campus in the new capital, and from there the students will both receive training directly, so the students benefit, but the students themselves will also be able to provide kind of that sort of holistic health support to the local community, and particularly local construction workers who are unable to kind of sort of afford the sort of healthcare that often kind of they need to sort of to address their needs. So as I say, I think the framework, that kind of inclusive higher education framework, it's available on the QAA website, so it's easy to Google. Provides a useful way of systematically kind of, you know, asking that question, you know, how are your TNE partnerships in enabling an inclusive student experience?
Thank you so much, Professor Richard. There's a huge amount of kind of everything from practical, logistical, curriculum, the whole ethos of creating a sense of belonging, a huge amount of things that you've obviously thought about and considered very carefully in your partnerships, so thanks for sharing that with us. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to flip it straight to the audience and open it up for the deep dialogue that we've been talking about. So if one of my colleagues has a roving microphone, then we can come. We've got a hand up straight here at the front, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for sharing, I think, the examples of how to widen participation from a TNE perspective. I'm a big fan of DEI or EDI. But I still see a lot of challenges, and I think TNE can play a huge role in this, partly because when you come from an overseas context, what you bring is a new perspective, new ideas, new values into a local context. However, that also presents challenges. We have talked about gender, we have talked about class, we have talked about refugees, but when we talk about diverse group, we also need to look at diverse learning needs, physically challenged students, and most sensitive LGBT plus groups of students, if not staff. So my very first question is that, as TNEs, how do you reconcile these very different values or worldviews in terms of supporting these different groups of students, especially in the context of local regulations and laws? For example, I work in China. China don't recognize LGBT plus group students. So, but then we need to support them, especially from the mental well-being, mental health perspective. How do you reconcile the kind of very sensitive and challenging between global, local, between Western, Eastern, and it's the culture that's the most challenging part, in addition to law. The second is about refugees. I'm a big supporter as well in terms of supporting refugees, but I'm from the Singapore and Malaysia context. And one of my biggest challenges is that in Singapore we don't support asylum. So for me, there is already a barrier of how we can support refugees in terms of higher education. So my question is really, if we can't bring them, so what else could we do in terms of supporting this group of refugees to the higher education sector? Thank you.
Thanks, May. We'll take both of those. Noor, did you have your hand? So we'll take one more question and then we'll come back to the panel.
Well, thank you very much for the nice presentation that we have from all the institutes today. I have a general comment and an experience in the Jordanian context actually, and then I move to my question to Bassant Hassib for the comments that she made about the micro-credentials and the hybrid kind of learning. Now, the case of Jordan is, as you know, the refugees coming from different countries in the past of the 15 years or so. When it comes to inclusive education, they have been covered by the laws of Jordan, either by the Higher Education Council in particular or by the cabinet also, because we have got some funds from different agencies to support that. So we have that good experience in covering all inclusive kind of, not only to those people who are come as refugees, but even to Jordanians, because we have let's say schools spread in different parts of the country, and the kind of education is not is delivered in a kind of balanced way. So we give respect to every particular kind of that. The comments I have about related to when it comes to hybrid learning or teaching, actually in Jordan we have also adopted a bylaw as of 2020 with the advent of COVID, and it has become part of the regulations that every program needs to be delivered. We have a percentile. This is something unique in Jordan. Every program has to be delivered with certain percentile, with the control being practiced and implemented by AQAC on a yearly basis, so that we make sure every program is delivered well. And when it comes to refugees in this part, and for the programs in general, we started delivering online programs for international students as part of the TNE actually, is to teach them certain programs, and it was very successful, and a large number of students enrolled in such programs. The comment I have is about the micro-credentials. Everybody has been talking about micro-credentials recently, and I participated in a large number of workshops in Europe, in the US, and in the Middle East. But we don't have a clear-cut policy for the micro-credentials until this moment. We have been talking a lot, theorizing a lot, but in a practice, I myself started doing a kind of regulations, but I'm still reluctant because I don't want things to go astray, so that nobody will, it might be misused by universities, because we need to push forward. We need to put kind of regulations for the TNE in particular, and for the general education in general. My question is, do we have certain regulations that are set standard, put forth, that we cannot imitate, I would say, but at least to have certain guidelines to help us working on that to start the process in a good way. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Safa. Okay, I'm going to come first to the far end of my panel for the question on challenges around different groups, LGBT, different learning needs. How do we reconcile those when we're delivering TNE? Does anyone, Professor Richard, Professor Rasha, Diana, any of you want to comment on that one?
The trickiest topic.
Yes.
Already. And I think, and it's an absolutely kind of critical question. And I think the first thing I would say is that I think it's a question that's not asked enough, and that and so what's being critical is both providing safe spaces for higher education institutions, and then when you're talking about an individual partnership, it's about providing a safe space where the two partners can have those conversations. Reconciliation might be too high a bar to try to kind of, I suppose, sort of realistic, because you have to respect the different kind of sort of legal frameworks, kind of cultures, etc. And that's a huge part of TNE. But I think universities themselves should offer safe spaces for students and staff. And there are particular organisations, and Stonewall's an example, where universities have gone to them for advice on how they navigate those issues to ensure that sort of, whether it's kind of sort of staff from different countries can kind of can feel kind of sort of comfortable and safe and secure, and sort of students as well. So it's quite a, I think on the one hand it's not that it's a sort of specialist area, but it does require sort of very sort of sort of sensitive handling. But my feeling is it's a conversation that the sector as a whole, the kind of international sector, not just the UK sector, sort of needs to be sort of having more frequently and more openly. But you kind of need a safe space in which to have that. So it's, yeah, I don't have the answer. Kind of reconcile might just be sort of too ambitious at this point. Perhaps not always. Perhaps other kind of pundits may comment on that. But I think it's certainly a critical one. Around the sort of the second aspect of that, in terms of enabling practice around and this is something that the framework does address, where students may have sort of disabilities, whether they're kind of physical or the kind of sort of various types of sort of with dyspraxia, dysplasia, and so on. I mean, that is something where there is now a kind of sort of wealth of literature, and often that's about sort of supporting partners and learning from partners in terms of what they're doing, and sometimes that's around flexibility of assessment design, offering a range of assessments both across the breadth of a program, but also possibly even for an individual module where that's appropriate. Say, well, actually, does it always have to be a kind of 2,500 word written essay that both the student and the member of staff who's marking a stack of them is going to feel sort of burned out? And so we use things like reflective blogs, sort of video blogs, and use the sort of digital technology that students are comfortable with, and also use that in feedback. It's really kind of sort of enlightening how students respond to sort of video recorded feedback, as opposed to, say, kind of sort of writing on a page. So I think it's partly around sort of flexibility in assessment and feedback. That part of the question. The first one, I think, is a critical conversation and more safe spaces for having that, and that's, I suppose, the sort of thing that Universities UK International, British Council kind of can help facilitate from certainly from a UK perspective.
Thank you, Richard. Professor Rasha.
Sure. I can perhaps add substance with this point in particular, because we've been dealing with a lot of different minorities and people with different special needs. We have, for example, cohorts that are visually impaired, and to us it was very unique at the very beginning, but then we acquired a lot of knowledge, and we've started to enhance our academic advising, the assistive technologies, the labs, even the instructors and the tutors, because we usually still face the problems of putting legislation's rules by people that are not facing the same problem as for example, the visually disabled. And same logic applies to, like, for example, it's not only because of mobility we have ramps or lower classrooms, it's a lot of different psychological support and a lot of other rules that become incorporated within the educational process. So I think part of this requires the quality assurance. If you need to make sure that this is enrolled or is actually accomplished during the process, we put it in the agreement with the transnational education. And yes, it's a shared understanding, definitely. It's a different culture, it's a different understanding. So we have this through the initial phases of the transnational education process, where we have a shared understanding, and whatever we need to make sure it's incorporated within the agreement, we put the KPIs, we put the quality assurance or accrediting body to make sure that this has been accomplished. Whatever is not explicitly mentioned and actually written, it just vanishes with the decision maker or the initiator. We've seen this several times across the path. So yes, transnational education would help both entities. Actually, I would say in this matter, sometimes we don't only learn from the Western side, sometimes we collaborate and help out with a shared understanding, so we get the best of both worlds too. So I was just reflecting on the different minorities, definitely the gender equality, and here I would reflect back to Dr. Bassant and Dr. Adriana. Yes, especially women in STEM, they do enroll in the higher education, but we don't see them represented with the same percentage in the recruitment. Actually, there was an event, STEM event, with a dialogue conference just like this one, and I was sent by the second female university president, because we only had 3 university presidents as females across the path. She sent me a photo with all participants, all of them being men. All of them. So it was interesting because she was in engineering. She was a university president, and her field was engineering. Professor Reem Bahgat, may her soul rest in peace. She just passed away last year. All right. So I would say it's governance and quality assurance, and agreements and shared understanding. That's my response. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Rasha. We need to give Ben and Bassant just a quick moment. I'm getting the time signal from Hibber at the front, but just on the questions on refugees. So what can we do if, for legal reasons, national policy, we can't actually have refugees in our classrooms? What can we do, Ben? And on micro-credentials in Jordan, any guidelines, any regulations on how to make that work? Maybe Bassant.
With regards to the regulations regarding micro-credentials, I do believe that we have a set of regulation, because, and this is, I'm not really sure of, but from the first panel here, on the first day, I remember the minister and the head of the Supreme Council, they talked about micro-credentials as part of the national strategy. And I believe that if there isn't, there is some kind of regulation that is on the way. As part of our project, we will have our own regulation on the level of the university of how we are going to run these micro-credentials. So, at least this is a start. And then through the feedback that we have, we will have this kind of loop of reverting back to the policy makers in order to inform how we can have better regulatory frameworks for micro-credentials if there is no one, not a single one in place. Or if there is one, how we can improve it. So I believe this is what we're going to do through our project.
On countries that don't have many refugees, well, thank you, because you're kind of making my point for me. I would argue the UK is in a kind of, not as an extreme case as Singapore, but heading in that direction with policy, and there's still lots of ways that I think UK universities or universities can contribute. Firstly, online delivery, but that needs to be done in partnership with organisations, UN agencies that have community centres, equipment, data, basically provides the infrastructure that ensures that refugees can have meaningful access to online delivery. And then the other thing is joining up with other universities. So are there collaborative things that your universities or other universities can do alongside universities that do have a presence in a particular country? Because I don't think universities need to say that they need to contribute a full scholarship or full, undergraduate, masters, etc. It might be that you can contribute some of the pastoral work, or some content, or some teaching support. There's lots of different ways that I think universities can contribute, and it doesn't need to be in country.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm afraid we're out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap up. I think we leave with maybe 2 points that were made at the beginning by Professor Rusher and Dr. Bassant. One is that once you start on this pathway for inclusion and access, you must follow through, because you're responsible for meeting the needs of those people who you've started to engage. And the other one is just the importance of this for universities' missions. You mentioned, Dr. Bassant, this is a key part of the mission of all universities, and I think if we go away with that thought in mind, then it inspires us to do more. But please join me in thanking my wonderful panel. Of course, now you know who they are, so you can find them also at the break later on.
Thank you, Susana and panel, for a great discussion. Next up, we have a presentation on the role of recognition in supporting successful TNE, because recognition is central to trust, as we discussed on the first day. Please welcome our speaker, Jody Duffy, the Head of Research, Data and Insights from UKENI. Welcome, Jody.
Hello, good morning everyone. It's really great to be here for the third day of this deep dialogue, continue a lot of these really rich and insightful discussions we've had around all sorts of different aspects of TNE. My name is Jody Duffy, and I'm Head of Research, Data and Insights at UKENI. I'm just going to talk initially, just to give a bit of an introduction to UKENI and what it is that we do. So UKENIC is the UK National Information Centre for the recognition and comparison of international qualifications and skills. So we provide guidance on how international qualifications compare to UK frameworks and UK qualifications. We provide that advice to individuals coming to the UK for work or for study. We also provide that kind of advice to organisations, particularly universities and colleges, but also professional bodies and UK government departments. And then in addition, we also provide information on UK qualifications to support their recognition overseas. So to help people in other countries understand what UK qualifications are, how they are recognised, how they are regulated and quality assured, what do they mean, how do their levels compare. So I just thought I would start off by talking a little bit about what we mean when we talk about recognition in the context of qualifications. So the definition up there on the slide comes from the UNESCO Global Convention on Recognition of Higher Education Qualifications. And it talks about a formal acknowledgement of the validity and the level of a qualification, and particularly for the purpose of someone, an individual who holds that qualification, using it to access employment or to apply for further study. So when we talk about recognition, we're talking about people using their qualifications. So they've got a degree and they're